L'Etoile was more than Chicago's most prestigious French restaurant. It was a stage where wealth, power, and danger dined under the same glittering chandeliers. Every evening, billionaires negotiated multi-million-dollar deals over vintage wine. Politicians whispered promises they would later deny, and crime bosses conducted silent business behind polished smiles. The restaurant demanded perfection from its staff. Every waiter and waitress was expected to look elegant, move gracefully, and disappear into the background without leaving the slightest impression. Clara Jenkins, however, had never fit that image. At 280 pounds, she stood out physically while remaining strangely invisible in every other way. Guests rarely acknowledged her existence, never remembered her name, and almost never looked her in the eye. To them, she was simply another oversized waitress carrying silver trays between tables. Years of quiet humiliation had taught Clara to accept being overlooked. But what everyone else saw as her greatest weakness had slowly become her greatest advantage. Because no one considered her important enough to notice, they spoke freely in front of her. They revealed secrets, discussed affairs, confessed financial crimes, and exposed hidden motives without ever lowering their voices. Clara had spent years silently observing the world's most powerful people, sharpening her understanding of human behavior until reading body language became second nature. A slight twitch around the mouth, an uneven breathing pattern, restless fingers tapping against crystal glasses, or eyes lingering a second too long toward an exit, could tell her more than words ever could. While the wealthy believed they were invisible behind expensive suits and practiced smiles, Clara saw everything they desperately tried to hide. On a cold Tuesday evening in late October, the atmosphere inside L'Etoile felt different the moment Clara stepped onto the dining floor. The restaurant buzzed with its usual elegance, yet an almost imperceptible tension lingered beneath the polished surface. Every employee already knew who would be occupying the restaurant's most exclusive private table that night. Damian Rossi had reserved it under one of his countless corporate aliases, though no one dared pretend they didn't know his true identity. Officially, he was the successful owner of Rossi Logistics and Freight, a transportation empire stretching from Chicago to Miami. Unofficially, he was the undisputed leader of one of the most powerful crime syndicates in the country. Damian never needed to raise his voice or threaten anyone. His presence alone transformed the atmosphere of an entire room. Conversations became quieter, movements slower, and even seasoned executives unconsciously straightened their posture when he entered. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy mahogany doors opened, and Damian walked inside wearing a perfectly tailored black overcoat. He acknowledged no one, yet every eye followed him as he crossed the dining room with calm, measured confidence. Walking beside him was Chloe Vanderwall, a stunning socialite whose beauty seemed almost unreal. Her emerald silk gown shimmered beneath the restaurant lights. Her platinum hair framed a flawless face, and every movement reflected years of elite social refinement. To everyone else, they appeared to be the perfect couple. To Clara, something was terribly wrong. As Clara approached their table carrying a silver pitcher of sparkling water, her trained instincts immediately detected details invisible to everyone else. Chloe smiled warmly at Damian, yet the smile never reached her eyes. Her breathing was slightly uneven, and the fingers resting delicately against the linen tablecloth tapped an irregular rhythm that betrayed growing anxiety. Every few moments, her gaze drifted toward the restaurant entrance before quickly shifting to the dimly lit bar in the distance. She appeared less interested in enjoying dinner than in waiting for something or someone to arrive. Clara poured the sparkling water without drawing attention to herself, pretending to focus on the crystal glasses while quietly studying Chloe's subtle expressions. Years of watching guests had taught her that fear looked different from guilt, and guilt looked different from anticipation. Chloe wasn't afraid of Damian. She was waiting for an event she already knew was coming. As Clara stepped back, another small detail caught her attention. Chloe's designer clutch rested slightly open beside her plate, revealing the glowing screen of her phone. A new message had appeared only seconds earlier. It contained just one word: ready. Clara's pulse slowed instead of racing. Experience had taught her that panic clouded judgment. Observation revealed the truth. Moving naturally toward the service station, Clara allowed her eyes to scan the dining room without appearing suspicious. Almost immediately, she noticed several unfamiliar faces disrupting the restaurant's normal rhythm. 2 men occupied booth 4, dressed in inexpensive suits that fit awkwardly across their shoulders. They had barely touched their whiskey despite sitting there for nearly half an hour. And both repeatedly watched Damian's reflection in the mirrored wall, rather than looking directly at him. At the bar, another man wearing a charcoal trench coat remained alone with an untouched drink. His left hand buried deep inside his pocket, as if gripping something concealed beneath the fabric. Clara searched for Tomas, the young busboy who normally worked near the kitchen entrance, but he had disappeared without explanation. Every individual detail might have meant nothing on its own. Yet together they formed a pattern too precise to ignore. Then Clara recognized the man at the bar from a local news report she had watched weeks earlier. Jonathan Hayes, a freelance assassin with known ties to the Irish criminal factions, recently driven out of Chicago's Fulton Market District by Damian Rossi's organization. Suddenly, the entire picture became horrifyingly clear. Chloe's restless behavior, the mysterious text message, the strategically positioned gunman, Jonathan Hayes waiting patiently at the bar, and Tomas's unexplained disappearance were all pieces of the same carefully orchestrated plan. Chloe wasn't simply nervous about dinner. She had betrayed the man sitting across from her. She had delivered Damian Rossi directly into an assassination trap. As Clara watched, Chloe excused herself and calmly walked toward the ladies' room, briefly exchanging an almost invisible nod with the man at the bar. Every remaining doubt disappeared. The attack would begin the moment Chloe was safely out of the line of fire. Standing frozen beside the service station, Clara realized she was one of the very few people in the restaurant who understood exactly what was about to happen, and unless someone acted within the next few seconds, Damian Rossi's empire would end in a storm of bullets before his dinner had even been served. The realization struck Clara with crushing force, leaving her frozen behind the service station as her mind raced through impossible choices. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to pretend she had seen nothing, and to escape before bullets shattered the elegant dining room. She was only a waitress. No one would expect her to interfere in a conflict involving one of Chicago's most feared crime bosses. Yet another thought refused to leave her mind. If she remained silent, Damian Rossi would be dead within minutes, along with innocent employees and unsuspecting guests caught in the crossfire. Her hands trembled as she imagined the consequences of both decisions. Warning Damian could make her the assassin's first target. Staying quiet would force her to live with the knowledge that she had watched a man die when she could have prevented it. The weight of that choice settled heavily on her shoulders. Then she remembered something no one else inside L'Etoile would have considered important. Damian had always treated the staff with quiet respect. He never snapped his fingers for service, never mocked anyone, and always thanked the people who worked behind the scenes. Last Christmas, he had left an extraordinary tip for the kitchen staff, after learning one of the dishwashers was struggling to pay rent. Those small acts of humanity suddenly mattered more than his reputation as a ruthless mafia leader. Clara took a deep breath and made her decision. She would risk everything, moving quickly but without attracting attention. Clara tore a blank receipt from the service printer and searched her apron for a pen. She knew she had only seconds before the carefully planned attack unfolded. There was no time to explain everything in person, and speaking aloud would only alert the assassins that their plan had been exposed. Carefully controlling her shaking hands, she wrote a short message in bold letters. Your girlfriend sold you out. They are in position. Bar and booth 4. Folding the tiny piece of paper until it was scarcely larger than a postage stamp, She concealed it in her palm and returned to the dining room carrying Damian's side dishes. The atmosphere had become unbearably tense. The two men in booth 4 leaned forward as their hands disappeared beneath their jackets. The man at the bar slowly stood up, leaving cash beside his untouched drink before taking a measured step toward Damian's table. Chloe was still safely hidden inside the ladies' room. Clara approached Damian with practiced composure, placing the dishes on the table as though everything were perfectly ordinary. As she adjusted his glass of scotch, her fingers expertly slipped the folded note beneath its base. Damian briefly looked up. Their eyes met for a single heartbeat. Clara's expression carried none of the polite smile expected from a waitress. Instead, it held quiet urgency and absolute certainty. She gave the faintest nod before calmly turning away, forcing herself to walk at the same steady pace despite the thunderous beating of her heart. From the safety of the service station, Clara watched Damian without taking her eyes off him. He never flinched. He never glanced around the restaurant searching for danger. Instead, he casually reached for his drink, allowing the folded note to disappear into his hand beneath the cover of the tablecloth. Only after reading the message did the slightest change appear on his face, a barely noticeable tightening of his jaw that would have escaped almost anyone else's attention. Within seconds, the relaxed businessman vanished, replaced by the calculating survivor who had built one of the country's most powerful criminal empires. Rather than reaching for a weapon, Damian calmly pulled out his phone and typed a brief message, disguising every movement behind complete indifference. Across the room, the assassin at the bar began moving into position just as Chloe gracefully returned from the hallway. Wearing the same flawless smile she had displayed all evening, Damian greeted her with remarkable calm, his voice warm enough to conceal the storm gathering beneath the surface. He asked an unexpected question about her brother Richard and the enormous debt he owed to the Southside Irish. The color drained instantly from Chloe's face. Her breathing became uneven, and her eyes involuntarily darted toward the man waiting near the bar. That single glance confirmed everything Damian needed to know. The betrayal was real. The moment stretched into complete silence before exploding into violence. Damian lunged across the table, grabbing Chloe by her dress and pulling her directly in front of him just as the first suppressed gunshot shattered the sparkling water bottle where his chest had been only a fraction of a second earlier. Clara's scream echoed through the restaurant as terrified diners dove beneath tables and crystal glasses burst across the marble floor. Chairs toppled over, expensive china shattered, and frightened guests scrambled for cover while the elegant dining room transformed into a battlefield. Using Chloe as a temporary shield, Damian threw her into the advancing gunmen, disrupting their coordinated assault long enough to draw the compact pistol hidden beneath his clothing. His response was swift, controlled, and terrifyingly precise. Every shot struck its intended target, disabling the attackers without wasting a single movement. Around the room, Clara abandoned any thought of protecting herself. Instead, she rushed toward the terrified hostess, dragging the young woman behind the solid oak reception desk before pulling another waiter to safety as bullets ripped through paintings and smashed towering windows overlooking the city. Broken glass rained across the polished floor while frightened screams blended with gunfire and crashing furniture. Within seconds, Damian closed the distance to the final assassin, disarmed him with brutal efficiency, and forced him to the ground. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the violence ended, leaving behind only terrified silence and the sound of distant police sirens approaching through the rain. Standing amid the wreckage of what had once been Chicago's finest restaurant, Damian slowly surveyed the devastated room before his eyes found Clara hiding beside the hostess stand. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Damian quietly raised 2 fingers to his temple in a gesture of profound respect and gratitude, acknowledging the woman who had saved his life when every trained bodyguard had failed. Clara understood the meaning immediately. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She was no longer just an invisible waitress serving wealthy strangers. By slipping one small piece of paper beneath a glass, she had altered the fate of one of the most powerful men in Chicago and unknowingly changed the course of her own life forever. For the next several days, Clara lived as though every knock at her apartment door might be her last. The images from the shootout replayed endlessly in her mind whenever she closed her eyes, the deafening sound of gunfire, shattered crystals scattered across the marble floor, terrified screams echoing through L'Etoile, and Damian Rossi calmly surviving what should have been a perfectly executed assassination. She barely slept, jumping at the smallest noise outside her tiny apartment in Logan Square. Every unfamiliar car slowing near her building made her heart race. She convinced herself that sooner or later, someone connected to the failed ambush would come looking for the waitress who had ruined everything. She had interfered in the affairs of dangerous people, and ordinary people were never supposed to survive mistakes like that. Yet despite the fear consuming her, she never regretted her decision. If given the choice again, she knew she would still slip that warning beneath Damian's glass. On the fourth evening, rain poured relentlessly over Chicago as Clara returned home carrying a small bag of groceries. Halfway down the quiet street, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade silently pulled alongside her. She froze. Her pulse quickened as the tinted rear window slowly lowered. A sharply dressed man stepped out, holding an umbrella against the rain. His tailored navy suit, calm expression, and disciplined posture immediately suggested someone accustomed to serving powerful people. Introducing himself simply as Leon, he spoke with quiet confidence. "Mr. Rossi would like to meet with you." Clara instinctively tightened her grip on the grocery bag. Every warning her mind had imagined suddenly felt real. She considered refusing. But Leon's tone carried neither hostility nor intimidation. Instead, there was a respectful certainty that made it clear this was not a request likely to be repeated. After a long moment of hesitation, she climbed into the waiting vehicle. Uncertain whether she was driving toward an opportunity or her own destruction, the journey carried them far beyond the crowded streets of downtown Chicago until they reached an enormous lakeside estate hidden behind towering iron gates. The mansion overlooked the dark waters of Lake Michigan, radiating quiet wealth rather than unnecessary extravagance. Inside, every hallway reflected impeccable taste museum-quality artwork, polished oak floors, and a silence that felt strangely comforting despite the home's intimidating scale. Leon escorted Clara into an expansive study where Damian Rossi stood beside a large window overlooking the storm outside. Without the expensive suit he had worn at L'Etoile, Damian appeared less like the feared head of a criminal empire and more like a thoughtful man carrying the burden of countless responsibilities. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon before turning toward Clara with an expression she hadn't expected to see. It wasn't suspicion or calculation. It was genuine gratitude. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Damian broke the silence with a simple question that carried more weight than any threat ever could. "Why did you save me?" Clara had anticipated countless possibilities during the drive to the mansion, but she had never prepared herself for that question. Looking into his eyes, she searched for an answer grand enough to explain risking her own life. In the end, only the truth remained. "Because you always said thank you," she replied quietly. Damian looked genuinely confused. So Clara continued. She explained that while many wealthy customers treated restaurant employees as though they barely existed, he had always acknowledged the people serving him. He thanked waiters, respected cooks, and once quietly helped a struggling dishwasher without seeking recognition. "You may be a dangerous man," Clara admitted, "but you never treated ordinary people as if they were beneath you. I couldn't stand there and watch someone like that be murdered." Her words filled the room with an unexpected silence. For perhaps the first time in years, Damian found himself speechless. Throughout his life, people had admired his power, feared his influence, or desired his wealth. No one had ever claimed to save him because of simple kindness. Damian then revealed that after the attack, he had ordered a complete investigation into Clara's background. His people discovered there was far more to the quiet waitress than anyone had imagined. She held a university degree in psychology, though circumstances had forced her into the hospitality industry instead of the career she had once envisioned. Over 10 years of serving powerful guests had become an education of its own. She had developed an extraordinary ability to interpret body language, recognize deception, and notice details that even trained security professionals routinely overlooked. Damian confessed that his highly paid protection team had completely failed to detect the betrayal unfolding inside L'Etoile, while Clara had uncovered the entire conspiracy simply by observing the people around her. Rather than feeling embarrassed by the praise, Clara simply shrugged. "People don't watch what they think doesn't matter," she answered. "They ignored me because of how I looked. That made them careless. They revealed everything without realizing someone was paying attention." A slow smile spread across Damian's face as he realized the true value of the woman standing before him. Clara's greatest strength had never been physical courage or combat skills. It was her extraordinary understanding of people. She could recognize fear hidden behind confidence, dishonesty disguised as charm, and betrayal concealed beneath perfect manners. Those abilities were worth far more than any weapon. Walking behind his massive mahogany desk, Damian opened a checkbook and calmly wrote an amount that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. $250,000. Sliding the check across the polished surface, he explained that it was merely a signing bonus. Then he offered her a permanent salary of $500,000 a year. Clara stared at him in disbelief, convinced she had misunderstood. Damian gently shook his head before clarifying exactly what he wanted from her. "I don't need another bodyguard," he said. "I have plenty of men willing to carry guns. What I don't have is someone who sees what everyone else misses." He explained that he wasn't asking Clara to become involved in violence or illegal operations. She would never be expected to fire a weapon or intimidate anyone. Instead, she would attend important meetings, negotiations, business dinners, and social events. Her only responsibility would be to observe. She would quietly study every expression, every gesture, every hesitation, and every conversation before telling him who could be trusted and who intended to betray him. In a world where deception surrounded every business deal, her gift was more valuable than an army of armed guards. Clara looked down at the contract lying beside the check, realizing that the invisible waitress everyone had ignored for years was being offered a future she had never dared imagine. Accepting Damian's proposal meant stepping into a dangerous world unlike anything she had ever known. Yet it also meant leaving behind a life in which she had been overlooked, underestimated, and forgotten. Taking a slow, steady breath, Clara reached for the pen and signed her name. In that quiet moment, without a single gunshot or dramatic confrontation, the course of her life changed forever. The frightened waitress who had once believed she would spend her future carrying trays through crowded dining rooms had just become the most trusted advisor to one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Over the following months, Clara's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Officially, she joined Rossi Logistics as a senior logistics consultant, a title deliberately chosen to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. In reality, everyone close to Damian knew she held a far more important role. She attended private meetings, accompanied him to negotiations, and quietly observed every conversation without drawing attention to herself. At first, Damian's senior lieutenants struggled to understand why an ordinary waitress with no criminal background had suddenly become one of the most trusted people in the organization. Some mocked her appearance behind her back, convinced that Damian had allowed gratitude to cloud his judgment. Others dismissed her as nothing more than an assistant who happened to be in the room. Clara heard the whispers. But unlike the timid woman who had once lowered her head whenever someone stared at her, She no longer felt the need to defend herself. She understood that respect earned through actions lasted far longer than respect demanded through fear. Their doubts began to disappear during Clara's very first high-level meeting. Damian had arranged a private discussion with a powerful city alderman whose political influence could open countless business opportunities. Throughout the conversation, the official appeared calm, confident, and cooperative. Every member of Damian's security team believed the meeting had gone perfectly. Clara, however, remained unusually quiet. As they left the building, she asked Damian to postpone any agreement. She explained that despite the man's relaxed smile, he had been sweating excessively in an air-conditioned room, repeatedly touching the inside of his jacket, and unconsciously scanning the exits every few seconds. More importantly, his pupils remained unusually dilated whenever sensitive topics arose. Clara believed he wasn't merely nervous, he was terrified of being exposed. Damian trusted her instincts enough to delay the deal. 2 days later, federal agents arrested the alderman after revealing he had been secretly cooperating with investigators while wearing a concealed recording device. Had Damian finalized the agreement that day, his entire organization could have been compromised. From that moment forward, even his most skeptical advisors began paying closer attention whenever Clara spoke. Her reputation grew stronger with every passing week. During a charity gala attended by several influential business leaders, Clara noticed something almost imperceptible. Arthur, Damian's longtime accountant and one of his oldest advisors, subtly mirrored the posture and gestures of a rival crime boss whenever they interacted across the room. Most people would have dismissed the behavior as coincidence, but Clara recognized the unconscious signs of familiarity and hidden loyalty. She quietly suggested that Damian order a complete financial review before confronting Arthur directly. The investigation uncovered millions of dollars quietly transferred into offshore accounts over several years. Arthur had been stealing from the organization while secretly feeding financial information to Damian's competitors. Once again, Clara had uncovered a betrayal long before anyone else suspected it. The revelation sent shockwaves throughout the syndicate. The laughter that had once followed her through the hallways disappeared completely. Those who had judged her by her appearance now understood that her greatest weapon was not physical strength or intimidation, but an extraordinary ability to recognize deception before it became disaster. As her confidence continued to grow, Clara herself began to change. She never attempted to become someone else. Nor did she believe she needed to lose weight to deserve respect. Instead, she transformed the way she carried herself. Damian insisted that the finest tailors in Chicago design an entirely new wardrobe specifically for her. Not to hide her figure, but to celebrate it. Elegant tailored suits, luxurious evening gowns, and perfectly fitted coats replaced the oversized uniforms she had worn for years. More importantly, her posture changed. She no longer apologized whenever she entered a room. She no longer avoided eye contact or instinctively stepped aside whenever others approached. She walked with calm assurance, speaking only when necessary because she understood that confidence required no performance. People who once looked through her now found themselves waiting to hear her opinion before making important decisions. For Clara, the greatest transformation was not physical but psychological. She finally stopped measuring her worth through the opinions of strangers. The insecurities that had quietly followed her throughout adulthood gradually lost their power as she embraced the woman she had always been beneath years of rejection and self-doubt. Working alongside Damian every day also revealed a side of him that almost no one else ever witnessed. Outside the public eye, he was remarkably patient, thoughtful, and surprisingly willing to listen. Long after meetings ended, the two of them often remained inside his study reviewing reports, discussing negotiations, and analyzing the personalities of the people they had encountered throughout the day. Their professional conversations slowly evolved into something much deeper. They shared takeout dinners when work stretched late into the evening, debated psychology, laughed over stories from Clara's years in hospitality, and occasionally spoke about childhood memories neither had ever shared with anyone else. Damian admired the way Clara challenged his assumptions without fear, while Clara discovered that beneath the reputation of a ruthless crime boss stood a lonely man who had spent most of his life questioning everyone's loyalty. For the first time in years, Damian found himself trusting another person completely, not because she feared him or desired his wealth, but because she consistently proved herself honest, courageous, and impossible to manipulate. That trust gradually developed into something neither of them had expected. Damian noticed that his attention naturally drifted toward Clara whenever she entered a room. He found excuses to prolong meetings simply to continue their conversations. Even after exhausting days filled with negotiations and endless responsibilities, he looked forward to the quiet hours they spent together reviewing reports over dinner. Clara noticed the subtle changes as well. Damian no longer addressed her merely as an advisor. His voice softened whenever he spoke to her. His expressions became warmer, and he often caught himself watching her with an admiration he could no longer hide. One quiet evening, while they worked alone inside his study organizing shipping manifests, their hands accidentally touched as they reached for the same file. Neither of them pulled away immediately. In that brief moment of silence, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and the soft glow of the fireplace, Damian realized a truth he had spent weeks trying to ignore. The woman who had once slipped a tiny handwritten note beneath his glass had become far more than the guardian of his empire. She had become the person he trusted most, the only one capable of seeing every hidden weakness beneath his carefully constructed image, and the only woman who made him feel completely understood, without either of them fully realizing when it had happened. Professional respect had quietly grown into profound affection, laying the foundation for a relationship that would change both of their lives forever. Weeks passed after Damian finally admitted the feelings he had struggled to hide for so long. One quiet evening, as the city lights shimmered beyond the windows of his lakeside estate, the two of them remained alone in his study, finishing yet another late-night strategy session. The paperwork had long since been forgotten, replaced by comfortable silence and half-empty glasses of wine. Damian looked at Clara for several long moments before gently taking her hand. Throughout his life, he had negotiated with politicians, confronted rival crime families, and survived countless attempts on his life without hesitation. Yet confessing his feelings to the woman standing before him proved far more intimidating than facing any enemy. "You spend every day reading everyone around you," he said softly, his thumb brushing across her fingers. "Tell me something. Clara, have you ever stopped to notice the way I look at you?" She lowered her eyes, caught completely off guard. For years she had convinced herself that admiration belonged to women who looked nothing like her. Even after everything they had shared, she still found it difficult to believe that a man like Damian Rossi could truly see her that way. Before she could dismiss herself with another self-deprecating remark, Damian gently lifted her chin. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't tell me what you think you aren't. Let me tell you what I see. I see the bravest woman I have ever known. I see the only person who has never wanted anything from me except for me to come home alive. I see the woman who saved my life, protected my empire, and somehow managed to save the man I had forgotten still existed beneath all of this." Clara's eyes filled with tears as years of insecurity slowly dissolved beneath the sincerity in his voice. Without another word, Damian leaned forward and kissed her. It was not driven by impulse or passion alone. It was the quiet promise of absolute trust, unwavering loyalty, and a future neither of them had ever expected to find. For the first time in her life, Clara allowed herself to believe she was loved exactly as she was, although their relationship remained private for several months. Damian eventually decided there was no reason to hide the most important person in his life. The perfect opportunity arrived with the annual Continental Charity Gala, the city's most prestigious social event attended by business leaders, politicians, celebrities, and influential figures from Chicago's hidden underworld. Fate seemed almost poetic in its choice of venue. Following months of extensive renovations after the infamous shootout, the gala would be held inside L'Etoile, the very restaurant where Clara had once spent years carrying trays while wealthy strangers looked straight through her. As their car pulled beneath the entrance canopy, Clara paused for a brief moment, staring at the familiar doors where everything had begun. Only months earlier, she had entered that building wearing a black waitress uniform, hoping simply to finish another shift unnoticed. Tonight, she stepped onto the same polished marble floor, wearing a breathtaking sapphire blue gown tailored exclusively for her. Its elegant design highlighting her confidence rather than concealing her figure. Diamond earrings caught the glow of the crystal chandeliers, and every graceful step reflected the remarkable woman she had become. She had not transformed by changing her appearance. She had transformed by finally believing she no longer needed anyone else's permission to recognize her own worth. The moment Damian and Clara entered the ballroom together, conversations stopped almost instantly. Hundreds of guests turned toward the entrance as silence spread across the room. The former waitresses and hostesses recognized Clara first. Their expressions shifted from confusion to complete disbelief. The bartenders, who had once absent-mindedly passed her in crowded hallways, stared in stunned silence. Even the restaurant managers, who had spent years overlooking her, suddenly struggled to process what they were seeing. The invisible waitress they barely acknowledged was now walking beside the most feared and respected man in Chicago, carrying herself with the calm confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she stood. Una B1. Influential businessmen, politicians, and rival crime bosses approached Damian to offer their greetings. Yet instead of focusing on him, many found themselves studying Clara with a mixture of curiosity and respect. They had heard rumors about the mysterious advisor who had repeatedly uncovered betrayals before anyone else could detect them. But few had expected that legendary figure to be the same woman they had once ignored while ordering another glass of wine. As the evening progressed, one of Damian's longtime rivals finally stepped forward and offered a polite nod. "Mr. Rossi," he said carefully. "I believe congratulations are in order. I assume this is your new partner." Damian smiled faintly before placing an arm gently around Clara's waist. Instead of offering a brief introduction, he turned so that his voice carried clearly throughout the silent ballroom. "Allow me to introduce Clara Jenkins," he announced. "She is not standing beside me because of my generosity. She is standing beside me because I would not be standing here at all without her." Every guest listened in complete silence. Damian continued without hesitation. "The woman beside me is the reason I survived the night this city expected me to die. She saw what trained professionals failed to see. She protected my people when others ran. She has saved my life more than once. And every success my organization has enjoyed since then exists because of her wisdom, loyalty, and courage." His words echoed through the magnificent hall with undeniable conviction. Then his expression hardened as he slowly looked around the room. "Remember this," he said, his voice calm but impossible to ignore. "If anyone here ever chooses to underestimate Clara again, if anyone mistakes her kindness for weakness or her appearance for vulnerability, they will answer to me personally." No threats were necessary beyond those simple words. Every person present understood exactly what they meant. An almost reverent silence settled across the ballroom before the guests responded with respectful nods and quiet applause. The same people who had once dismissed Clara without a second glance now greeted her with genuine admiration. Powerful men who controlled fortunes and criminal empires lowered their heads in acknowledgement as she passed. Former colleagues from L'Etoile smiled with astonishment, realizing that the quiet woman who had spent years serving them had become someone whose influence reached far beyond anything they could have imagined. Clara accepted every greeting with grace, never displaying arrogance or bitterness toward those who had overlooked her in the past. She no longer needed revenge because life itself had become the greatest answer to every insult she had ever endured. Standing beside Damian beneath the glittering chandeliers of the restaurant where her extraordinary journey had begun, Clara quietly reflected on everything that had changed. She was no longer the invisible waitress who apologized for taking up space. She was no longer the woman defined by strangers' opinions or reduced to cruel assumptions because of her appearance. She had become a trusted strategist, an equal partner, and the one person capable of protecting one of Chicago's most powerful empires with nothing more than intelligence, empathy, and extraordinary insight into human nature. The world had not changed overnight, she had. By embracing the qualities others had mocked, she discovered the strength they had been too blind to recognize. As Damian gently took her hand and the two of them looked across the grand ballroom together, Clara understood that the greatest victory had never been becoming the queen of the Rossi Empire. It had been finding the courage to step out of the shadows and finally allow the world to see the remarkable woman she had always been.